Today, Ukraine and Poland may seem as old allies, but nothing could be further away from the truth. Their history is filled with massacres, ethnic cleansing, and mutual hate. Confronted by a bigger threat, today Ukraine and Poland work closely together, but things are not that simple. To have a better understanding of their relations, we must go deeper in European history. Through most of the Middle Ages and up until early 20th century, Poland was a considerably stronger and more developed country compared to Ukraine. In fact, when Poland was at the height of its power as part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Ukraine in today's national sense wasn't even defined yet. In terms of economy, military strength and culture, Poland was comparable to greatest European powers. In the 19th century, Ukraine became more relevant as many nations encountered the emergence and deep-seated spread of nationalism. Throughout this era, the region we now identify as Western Ukraine remained under Polish control. It's worth noting that Poland had historically regarded the Dnieper River as its inherent eastern boundary, with the lands beyond being inhabited by Cossacks, Tatars, and other populations. However, as we know, this wouldn't last. The course of European history underwent a significant upheaval when Galicia, a historical region in what is now Ukraine and Poland, was taken over by Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth held substantial influence as a significant European force, both culturally and in terms of economy and geopolitics. The division of this country in 1772 by Austria, Prussia, and Russia, considering its status as actually the largest European entity at the time, excluding Russia, created a substantial and far-reaching disruption. At that moment, Poland disappeared from the map and wouldn't be seen again until the end of World War I in 1918. Naturally, Poland's resurgence happened in the entirely new era within a new global context. In earlier ages, Poland may have largely disregarded the Ukrainians, perceiving them primarily as uneducated peasants residing in the eastern regions of the country. But the situation changed. The Ukrainian sense of national identity emerged on the historical scene. Aspirations were present, accompanied by the emergence of a middle class. This shift in dynamics stemmed from the prolonged absence of Poland. The First World War led to the dissolution of two empires, namely Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire. In their wake, numerous states emerged, including the fresh entities of Poland and Ukraine. The Ukrainian state came into being in April 1918, amid the war, with its establishment being influenced by Germany. Germany aimed to create a satellite state that would vigorously oppose Bolshevism. Consequently, we find ourselves with re-established Poland, backed by France, and a recently established Ukraine, backed by Germany. What could go wrong? As anticipated, a fierce conflict promptly erupted between Poland and Ukraine, primarily due to a significant region with a mixed population, particularly in eastern Galicia, now western Ukraine. This area became the epicenter of the clash. As expected, in this war, Poland was the winning side. Ukraine's prospects were dimmed by the unfortunate turn of events, as its key ally, Germany, found itself on the losing end of World War I. Consequently, among the two recently established nations, only Poland endured as a prevailing force. However, the century of war in Europe is just about to escalate in its full force. The destiny of Poland is well known. In 1939, the country would face yet another partition, this time between Nazi Germany and the USSR, orchestrated by Hitler and Stalin through the clandestine Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, effectively dividing Eastern Europe. On one front, Germany was rapidly strengthening its military might, while on the other, the USSR posed a significant threat, and there was not much that Poland at that moment could have done except safeguarding its own territory. Certainly, the Poles directly witnessed a serious threat that the Ukrainian nationalism presented, particularly in the eastern areas. As a result, they set out to diminish the Ukrainian identity and assimilate them into Polish culture. To begin with, they focused on Ukrainian Orthodox churches, many of which were changed into Catholic places of worship. For those that remain as Orthodox, they were compelled to hold services in Polish language. Moreover, Ukrainian officials were captured and put into prison. A series of persecutions were carried out, and as expected, a substantial number of Poles were relocated to Galicia and Volhynia regions. Step by step, Poles intended to suppress the Ukrainian identity, or at least push it beyond towards east. They might have succeeded over time because Ukrainians found themselves without allies. But then comes 1939 and Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And suddenly everything the Poles did to the Ukrainians is overshadowed by what the Soviets will do to the Poles. Immediately after annexing Poland, the Soviets launched a systematic persecution of the Polish middle and upper class, activists, politicians, military leaders. By 1941, around 200,000 Poles ended up in Siberia, from which many never returned. More significant prisoners were sent to Soviet basements in Kharkiv, where torture and executions took place. It's estimated that over 1.2 million Poles were deported to Soviet territory. In some places, the Soviets replaced expelled Poles with Ukrainians, while actively working against any Ukrainian organization that sought independence. Ukrainian nationalists now had a new enemy, the Soviets, but they hadn't forgot their old enemy, the Poles, who they believed inhabited their territory and oppressed them throughout the interwar period. But on June 22, 1941, Nazi forces launched an invasion on Soviet Union. Soviets had to retreat from Ukraine, and now Germans were in control. The Nazis found allies in radical Ukrainian nationalist group like Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN. Soon after conquering territories of Poland and Ukraine, Nazis initiated massacres and ethnic cleansing, and Ukrainian nationalist militias actively helped them, cooperating in capturing Poles, Jews, communists, and anyone else that the Nazi occupiers intended to exterminate. Many Ukrainian OUN members received training and weapons directly from the German SS troops and aided in the killing of around 200,000 Jews living in Volhynia. Ukrainian forces actively learned some of the most infamous German mass-killing tactics, everything the Ukrainian OUN learned from the Nazis in 1942 that would apply to killing Poles the following year. And this is where the notorious Stepan Bandera steps in. Bandera was a leader of an extremist OUN B faction responsible for mass killings of different groups, including Poles. One of the most infamous incidents associated with this campaign is the massacre in Volhynia. The Volhynian massacre occurred between 1943 and 1944 and involved brutal violence between Ukrainian nationalist groups, including those associated with Bandera's OUN and the Polish population in the region. The exact death toll remains a subject of historical debate, but estimates suggest that thousands of Polish civilians, including men, women, and children, were killed during this period. The motives behind the massacre are complex and rooted in historical tensions between Ukrainians and Poles in the region. Ukrainian nationalists sought to establish an independent Ukrainian state and viewed the Polish presence as an obstacle. The Nazi occupation of the area also played a role, as the OUN hoped to exploit the situation to further their goals. The violence during the Volhynian massacre was characterized by its brutality, with reports of mass killings, mutilations, and forced displacements. In short, while Germans and Soviets fought their own war, Poles and Ukrainians had their own agendas. They both wanted to expel and exterminate each other, and since Ukrainian OUN was on good terms with the Nazis, they were the first to get the chance for an attack. In a different situation, it is quite possible Poles would do the same to Ukrainians. The mass killings carried out by the OUN and UPA, Ukrainian Insurgent Army, began around March 1943. They went from town to town, village to village, throughout Galicia, brutally killing Poles, unarmed men, women, and children. This ethnic cleansing reached its peak in the summer of 1943. On July 11, Ukrainian nationalist forces attacked 167 cities and settlements. In a matter of days, almost the entire Polish population was killed in numerous places. In some villages, the massacres lasted entire days. There were cases where women and children were locked in barns and then set on fire. The goal of Ukrainian nationalists at the time was to push Poles west. Poles were effectively expelled from eastern Galicia, or more accurately, it was often extermination rather than expulsion, so in a sense, mission was accomplished. The massacre of Poles didn't stop until the Red Army captured these areas in February 1945. After the collapse of the USSR, Poland sought to have this massacre by Ukrainians recognized as genocide. In Ukraine, these events are officially referred to as the tragedy in Volhynia. Some Ukrainian historians claim that a bilateral genocide occurred, suggesting that the Polish AK group committed similar crimes against Ukrainian civilians. The relations between Poland and Ukraine have been influenced by a complex history, including periods of cooperation and conflict. In the context of World War II and its aftermath, there have been significant challenges and tensions between the two countries, particularly due to the events like the Volhynian massacre and the displacement of populations. The Volhynian massacre and related atrocities during World War II led to a deep-seated animosity between many Poles and Ukrainians. The violence and mutual ethnic cleansing left scars in the collective memory of both nations. Despite efforts at reconciliation, historical events and differing narratives still create tensions between Poland and Ukraine. Disagreements about historical interpretations, particularly regarding World War II and related events, have occasionally strained diplomatic relations. With Russia as a common enemy, Polish-Ukrainian relations are at a historically high level today. However, the role of Stepan Bandera and massacres committed by Ukrainian nationalists cannot be easily forgotten. Is this newly found friendship only temporary and strictly contextual, or something permanent is yet to be seen?